Margaret Sanger was one of the first supporters and proponents of women's reproductive freedoms. Despite major government and social opposition, Margaret Sanger took a stand for women's reproductive rights by using grassroots movements and opening America's first birth control clinic. Because of her efforts, women today have access to multiple forms of birth control and contraceptives, which were not available legally until the 1960s. Margaret Sanger's years as an activist mostly took place during first-wave feminism, the 19th and early 20th century. First-wave feminism is characterized by the focus on the legal issues of equality and gaining women's suffrage. Sanger's activism has many similarities to other feminist movements during that time period, mostly through the techniques she used. Even though most of Sanger's work took place during first-wave feminism, and her techniques were similar to the ones used then, her ideals aligned more closely with second-wave feminism, when reproductive rights were a central issue. Sanger was a leader in both waves, and she was lucky to live long enough to see some of her work help women across America. Margaret Sanger was born in 1879 in Corning, New York, to Irish immigrants Anne and Michael Higgins. Sanger was the sixth of 11 children, and being from a large and impoverished family greatly affected her views on reproductive rights. Growing up, Sanger saw firsthand the damages caused by too many pregnancies. Margaret's mother, who was pregnant 18 times in 22 years, with 7 miscarriages and 11 successful childbirths, died at the age of 48. Margaret knew that she didn't want to follow in her mother's footsteps. She noticed that large families were often associated with poverty, unemployment, drunkenness, fighting, and incarceration, when smaller families were associated with cleanliness, leisure, freedom, space, and sunshine. Sanger wanted every woman to have a choice when it came to family size, and she believed that contraceptives were the way to do that. Contraception was legal in the United States for most of the 19th century. It was only in the 1870s, when a social purity movement was on the rise and growing in strength, that contraceptives were attacked. Supporters of the purity movement like Anthony Comstock claimed that contraceptives promoted prostitution and venereal disease. These supporters also worked for the passage of the Comstock Act in 1873. The Comstock Act was a federal law which prohibited the mailing of any information discussing contraceptives or any device intended for preventing conception. Many states also passed state laws outlawing the use of contraceptives, as well as their distribution. These laws came to be known as the Comstock Laws. Contraception initiatives were not extinguished, they just went underground. Articles and advertisements of contraceptives were seldom seen, and if they were, synonyms such as marital aids and hygienic devices were used. Condoms were sold as rubber goods, and cervical caps were womb supporters. But these devices continued to be unavailable for lower-class families and immigrants. For them, the only options were self-induced abortions, illegal $5 back alley abortions, or using popular household cleaning products like Lysol as douches. Margaret Sanger became a nurse after she finished with her schooling. During her time working in New York's Lower East Side, she often saw women who were sick and dying from too many pregnancies or botched abortions. Sanger often told a story about a young immigrant she knew named Sadie Sachs. This encounter with Sachs marked a turning point in Margaret's life. According to Sanger, she first treated Sachs for complications after a self-induced abortion. Sachs was concerned about getting pregnant again because in her weak medical state, another child would most likely kill her. But when she asked her doctor for help with not having any more children, the doctor told Sachs that she could tell her husband to sleep on the roof. 3 months later, the hospital received a call from Sadie Sachs' husband, begging Sanger to come and help his wife. By the time Sanger arrived at their house, Sachs was already dead from another self-induced abortion. After that, Margaret Sanger resolved to do something to help women who wanted to control their pregnancies and the size of their families. While she was in nursing school, Margaret met and married William Sanger, a young architect, artist, and radical. They had 3 children together, Stuart in 1903, Grant in 1908, and Peggy in 1910. Both of the Sangers were interested in socialism and left-wing politics. This is where Margaret found her activist niche: hygiene, health, sex education, and venereal disease. By 1912, Sanger was speaking to left-wing audiences on these topics, as well as writing a series of articles called What Every Girl Should Know that were published in The Call, a weekly socialist newspaper. One article written on venereal disease from February 1913 contained material that was deemed too explicit by the post office, and the article was banned under the Comstock Act. In response to this, the Call published What Every Girl Should Know, Nothing, by order of the Post Office Department. Sanger followed What Every Girl Should Know with another risky series on sex education called What Every Mother Should Know. Later in 1913, the Sanger family left New York for a year in France. While there, Margaret was able to investigate contraceptive methods not available for study in the U.S. Margaret returned to New York and in 1914 began her own radical monthly newspaper called The Woman Rebel. Sanger published 7 issues of The Woman Rebel in 1914. The goal of the paper was to advance women's freedoms and to advocate the prevention of conception. The term birth control was first used in the June issue of The Woman Rebel. The post office declared multiple issues unmailable, and in August, Sanger was charged with 9 counts of violating the Comstock laws. After the Rebel was declared unmailable, Sanger wrote a pamphlet containing all the contraceptive information and advice she wasn't able to put in newspapers. She published 100,000 copies of this pamphlet, titled Family Limitation, printed for her friends and colleagues to distribute while she was in jail. Margaret went to England to escape the charges and didn't return until October 1915, when William Sanger was arrested for distributing copies of Family Limitation. By the spring of 1916, Sanger was on a tour of the major western and midwestern cities, speaking on sexual health and birth control to left-wing groups. After her tour, she started working on putting together the plans for America's first birth control clinic. From the start, Sanger knew this was illegal, but went ahead with it anyway. On October 16, 1916, Sanger opened the clinic at 46 Amboy Street in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. She worked alongside her sister, Ethel Byrne, and Fanny Mindel, a recruit from Chicago. In the span of 10 days, the 3 women saw 488 married women and handed out information and devices related to contraception. A policewoman was sent to arrest them, and after trial, Sanger was sentenced to 30 days in jail. Her sister, Ethel Byrne, was sentenced to 30 days in a workhouse on Blackwell's Island, but she went on a hunger strike until carried out on a stretcher. After this, Sanger started a new publication, the Birth Control Review. It was Margaret's main project until the 1920s. In 1920, the Sangers divorced, and in 1921, Margaret Sanger married Noah Lee, a multimillionaire who devoted massive funds to her cause. In 1921, with financial backing, she started the American Birth Control League, ABCL. The ABCL turned into the Planned Parenthood Federation in 1942. Planned Parenthood is one of Sanger's longest-lasting legacies. When Sanger started her very first clinic in New York, it was the foundation for Planned Parenthood. She saw all the women who wanted and needed information about contraceptives, and Planned Parenthood was a better way for her to get that information out to the public. Additionally, Sanger worked with Planned Parenthood to get the pill approved by the FDA in 1960. It was a way for women to plan their pregnancies, and it was a form of birth control that could use without consent or even knowledge from men. Planned Parenthood was also one of the first organizations to fight for safe, reliable abortions. Since 1973, Planned Parenthood has been providing abortions to women across the country. In the past few years, conservatives and certain religious groups have been fighting against Planned Parenthood, trying to defund the organization and trying to outlaw abortion. Many states have also attempted to ban abortions and, in extreme cases, require women to report miscarriages. Through it all, Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger's legacy have stood strong in the fight for women's reproductive freedom. Even though Margaret Sanger faced setbacks and opposition from society and the government, she continued to take an often unpopular stance and work for reproductive rights that were denied to women. Sanger started by handing out literature and moved up to founding America's first birth control clinic. Her work and persistence has left a lasting mark and an honorable legacy behind.